Welcome back to Talent Take 5. I'm Andrew Sterling. My guest today is my friend Eve Enslow. She's the founder and CEO of Enslow Group. Eve has spent more than 2 decades inside the tech industry, including time at Microsoft, where she served as an enterprise strategist leading transformative go-to-market strategies and global campaigns. Before that, she actually started her career in broadcast journalism, working in documentary and children's television, including on my favorite, Bill Nye the Science Guy. Eventually, she brought that storytelling instinct into tech and never looked back. Today, through Enslow Group, Eve helps executives and leadership teams design what she calls their leader brand. It's that combination of personal presence, narrative, and credibility that builds trust and drives real influence. She also just released a book called Inspire, Go Big Without a Corner Office, which is all about how to lead bold ideas and drive change, even if you don't have an executive title. Eve, great to see you. Welcome to Talent Take 5.
Thank you for having me, Andrew. It's great to be here.
So, Eve, we've had many conversations. We're talking pre-pod. Branding is on everyone's mind, especially now where content is king. A lot of people hear personal brand and think performance or packaging, self-promotion. When you say branding isn't performance, it's alignment, is something you've said before. What do you mean by that? I'd love to talk about that.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, I think a lot of people get an impression a little bit like brand is outside in. Brand has to do with, certainly it has to do with how you present yourself. And so people's natural instinct is to sort of go with, does that mean, I have to have a particular style, or I have to, think about, it's a color palette, or it's sort of like they have this idea that it's something you apply to yourself. And unfortunately, that's not, ultimately where trust comes from, especially when we talk about branding people. When people are the product, as you know, we live in an age where increasingly, we have AI, we have all of these things. And so trust has really elevated to a position where, if I'm going to trust you, I need to know you. And so brand, always I say it comes from the inside out. And it is really about how do you help others know you, who you are, what you stand for, what your values are, what you're looking to achieve, the kind of impact you want to have in the world, how you're going to approach getting that impact, and why. Why are you really the right person right now to be leading that initiative in the world? And when people are allowed to know you, they can say, oh, okay, aha. I know where to put you. I know how to help you. I know who to connect you with. And so that's why I say it's not about performance. It's about alignment. Aligning, first of all, your values, what's going on inside of you with how you present yourself to the rest of the world. That's alignment number one. Alignment number two is communicating your brand in a way that others know how to align you. Where do you fit? Who do I connect you with? And then lastly, it's about that kind of trailing alignment, which is as you're out there having impact in the world, things are constantly moving, things are constantly changing. You're constantly having to steer the ship and make decisions. When you are strong in your brand, you know exactly how to approach that decision-making process. It becomes very clear, A, not B. This person, not that person. This is the right role for me. That is not. So that's what I mean by alignment.
What I think about in just reacting to that, the starting place of, I want to align who I am, my values, but also there's this thought of like, if you had never posted something before of content or, projecting your brand out into the market, I feel like there's this conflict between who you actually are versus what you think you should be in the eyes of the market. I'm curious, but as you get to the alignment, because I feel like that's a tension for people. And I think they get into this sort of, imposter syndrome of like, well, who I am versus who I think I need to be in the market is not aligned. So I'm not going to post something. I'm not going to think about my brand. How do you overcome some of that? Because I think that's the big, it's starting is like the hardest part. And I think that's maybe something that people really struggle with.
Yes. So just unpacking that a little bit. So to address the first part, you're absolutely right. I think almost 100% of the clients I've worked with had some level of imposter syndrome. that feeling of like who I am and what I am passionate about. My purpose in the world is somehow not enough. And I've got to, figure out how to package that in a way that feels a little bit inauthentic. And what I have found to be, over and over and over again is it's just untrue. When you show up as your most authentic self, when you just really have the confidence in who you are, you read differently. You read differently in how you communicate. You read differently in how you show up on screen, all of those things. And that confidence, people feel it and they feel the authenticity. When you start speaking from the heart and you start, kind of don't start with like, here's my title, here's my huge list of credentials. It's more about here's who I am and here's what I'm excited about. Here's what's getting me up in the morning. Here's what's lighting me up. That is infectious. And people see that it's real and people crave that humanity is now more than ever, really. And I'm going to just tell you a tiny story about that. So I call it my, multi-million dollar deal story. I was selling to an enterprise account in Microsoft's executive briefing center, and I was the first speaker of the day. And I could tell, they come in, customers have traveled, they're a little bit jet lagged. It's sort of hard to get everybody going in the day. It's hard to get them engaged. And I was talking about this great story about
Coffee.
how Microsoft technology was helping, this race car team by making them more efficient at pit stops. So by shifting from traditional ways of working to teams collaboration, they were shaving seconds off of their pit stops and they were starting to win races. Really fun. But I could tell it's like
Yeah.
there was just like no personal engagement. It was like, I was getting sort of that kind of blank, like, I don't know where to put this. I don't know how to think about this. And I just stopped for a minute and I said, I'm not a race car driver. I'm a widowed working mother. And every day I come to work feels like a race, like I'm on the racetrack. And by using technology like Teams, I can come back, I can save myself time, I can get quickly in and out of projects. I don't spend 15 or 20 minutes between every meeting trying to look through my email inbox and put together 10 different threads to figure out what happened on a project. And I'll tell you what, at the end of the day, if I can stay on track, the person who wins is my kid. So that's authentic, right? I was
That's
helping
impactful.
them know me, what I stand, who I am, what I stand for. They didn't care about my title. The CEO of that Fortune 50 company wanted to talk to me for 45 minutes and wanted me to open up my laptop and show him how I work with this technology because it's real. And so that's what I'm
Wow.
talking about brand. Our presence online is curated. People out there don't necessarily know every detail of our personal life. They don't need to know that. But what we do choose to share with them, they want to know that it's real. You asked me how people could start. It's a muscle like anything else, right? If we're not comfortable, confident, a lot of times it's just because we haven't done it that way in the past. I talk to people all the time about familiarity. What we are familiar with doing, we start to feel comfortable and confident doing. So what we practice is what we become comfortable with. Confidence, unfortunately, does not precede the action. Confidence comes after action. I'm sure you see that in your work all of the time, Andrew. So, start
Absolutely.
small. Start with some posts that stretch you just a little bit. Maybe you share a little bit of your humanity. Maybe you share a little bit of kind of personal insight about your why. And then see how it goes, see how it feels, see how people react to you. And I promise you, you'll start to feel more comfortable as you start to see the kinds of connections that you're making with other humans and how good that feels.
I think it's great advice for someone that's afraid to start, because I think that's its own kind of unique branding crisis. Um, but that's not the only time where I think there is friction on your sort of branding journey as an executive or as a leader. You've said that you had your own branding crisis after being in the tech industry for 20 years, especially after coming out of journalism. So I would think you have a very unique background with thinking through communication and the written word and things of that sort and being part of communications in general. But take us into that moment for you of like, you were super established. You've thought a lot about this work. What was that moment? What wasn't working? And how did that, sort of branding crisis moment reshape how you think about your own personal branding?
Sure. I think, so just kind of letting people into the know about my own story. I worked, as you mentioned, I came out of journalism. I went very early into the age of the internet, into Microsoft. I did some really innovative work there. I brought Microsoft's largest events to the web for the very first time. Built a really community of developers who were working with things like streaming media technologies. I actually worked in the product. I worked in Windows engineering on streaming technology for a number of years, and then ended up in kind of leading some of the largest global go-to-market narratives and brand narratives for Microsoft. And then I went to a couple of smaller companies. I worked at some partner companies, learned a lot, came to I came to a crossroads in my own career where it didn't fit anymore. The trajectory of kind of moving up the ladder in places like go-to-market, channel, etc., it didn't fit anymore. And I had to go back to my why. And here's what's really interesting is as human beings, like a lot of times the details of our lives change, but those core motivators and values tend to stay pretty consistent throughout our life. I have been a storyteller my whole life. I have been a community builder and an innovator my whole life. And I found that where I had ended up in terms of traditional career roles is that had stagnated. Those pieces of my core brand had stagnated. And so I had to look at where will my time, talent, and energy be best put to use and for the greatest impact? And that I think is a question that a lot of people kind of anywhere, kind of mid to second half of our careers, we come to. We come to a place where it's like, wow, I've built this amazing resume. I'm having a good career, solid career. And yet there's something a little bit missing here, which is, and I come back to that word alignment. I'm out of alignment with my brand in the sense of my time, my talent, my energy, my passion is not quite aligned to where I can have the greatest impact.
This idea you had mentioned to me before the pod about this idea of branding, to kind of going deeper on this idea of alignment, branding as an operating system. I think it's an interesting concept of how people can start to think about this idea of branding and content creation, putting themselves out there as a good mechanism for self clarity, almost like a sort of like it's almost a mirror for you. What does that look like when a leader is truly on brand with themselves, as they're thinking about, kind of to go back to what we were talking about before, looking in that content or self branding mirror of what they're putting out there? Is that me? What are some things that people could look at as they start that kind of pivot, that internal pivot to kind of operationalize this sort of approach with their? It's a workflow that they have to add in, which takes time. But for that starting executive that's looking at that, any examples that you might give of that shift and making that reality?
Yeah, I think the first shift is the internal clarity. Again, a lot of the clients that I work with are, they've been in career a while. They've had a number of achievements. A lot of them are, really interested in being high impact people in the world. And so one of the things that happens is we just have a lot of interests. And so getting really clear, all right, I can have a lot of interests, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I talk about them all online and all at the same time. And so thinking about getting first really clear, what am I up to in the world right now and for the next couple of years? And how do I want to talk about that? How do I want to differentiate myself in that space? We all bring really unique blends of background, values, approaches, unique ways of thinking about our problem space. How can I get really clear about what that differentiation is so that I can not only find the space, like the domain that I want to focus on, but I can narrow that even further to this is my niche within that domain and this is my secret sauce within that domain. And then lastly, we don't leave out our why or our humanity. Like, how did I get here? How can I help people understand why this is the thing that lights me up, or what it is specific about my background or my experiences that are driving me in this space? And I call that the what, the how, and the why. So when you do the work start to really get specific about those kind of 3 brand pillars, then you start to communicate much more effectively. So you're on, like, let's say that you have a goal of, gosh, I'd really like to just show up a little bit more often in a space like LinkedIn so that, my broader community of stakeholders can understand better who I am and what I'm about, and I can start to have a little bit more recognition in my space. Fantastic first goal. How do I do that in a meaningful way? Well, first, you really need to develop that strategy. What am I talking about? What's that topic area very specifically? How am I unique and special in that space? Or what specific point of view am I bringing to that space? Why? Why is it so interesting to me? And what are some of those kind of personal details I want to bring to the storytelling? So getting that clarity, and then, we kind of think that it's all about overwhelm, and you've probably read places that you have to post every single day and all of those things. I would say, a little bit like exercise. I always use this analogy with clients. If you're just starting to get fit, then going to the gym once a week for 3 hours, or even trying to go to the gym every day for 3 hours when you're first starting to get fit, it's probably not going to work very well for you. It's not going to
Yeah.
feel very sustainable.
Good luck.
But, going to the gym for 15 or 20 minutes a couple of times a week, as a starting point, and then building from there is probably going to be more successful in the long run. And so, finding that sustainable rhythm, even if it's just saying, gosh, I'm going to show up, for 20 minutes with my favorite, morning coffee or tea. And I'm just going to start to get a little bit more active, and I'm going to start to hone my own voice in a topic area. And I like to say that it's got to be a combination of you having some original thinking and posting about that. And most importantly, you also having a point of view on what other people in your topic area are talking about as well, because it's a conversation, it's a dialogue. It's not just us sort of blasting out there. That's that alignment piece again. We're really trying to build a sense of conversation, not just here's who I am, here's who I am, here's who I am, here's who I am, here's who I am. Hope that helps.
No, I think that's great. One of the it makes me think maybe many of us are just we're out of branding shape. Right?
Yes.
So,
Yes, for
uh,
sure.
start
Yes.
slow, right? Like
Yes.
you can't start with 100 sit-ups, start with 10.
Yes.
And then we could do 15. I think it's a great analogy.
That's so true. Unfortunately, what happens is we neglect, just like fitness and going to the gym, right? Life gets in the way. Maybe we're in a job and we're pretty happy with the job. And so we've just like allowed that kind of personal branding piece to fall away. This just came up in a conversation with another leadership development expert earlier this week, which she said, gosh, she's like, I see this all the time too. My leaders, they sort of neglect this whole part of their leadership. And then, what happens is it's time to go for your next role, or it's time to take on a new project, or it's just sort of time to do new, fresh networking. And all of a sudden you're realizing, I have a picture that's 10 years old and I haven't touched, my narrative or my biography, or maybe I got asked to be, a panel guest on something. And, suddenly it's like this feels like this really big thing to even come up with a current biography of myself to give to that, to that third party. And so I think I really like to think about this for leaders as an important part of your self-care. And I also like to think about it in that sort of narrative of like, it's not selfish. It makes you a better leader. Investing in this way in your leader brand, it makes you a better leader on a number of fronts. And it makes you a better leader today to your current audience. So let's imagine you're a leader and you're in a role and you just have a team of reports. Having a more consistent, thoughtful brand helps them. Again, for all the same reasons, it helps them understand who you are. It helps them understand what you're trying to drive in the world. It helps them, be of better service to those initiatives. It helps you create a more cohesive culture on your team today. Let's say you don't have direct reports, but you just have a community of stakeholders you're trying to influence. All those same things are true. And so, I want to help people get over that little bit of feeling like, maybe I'm taking time away from other work in order to invest in this. It's going to make all of that other work smoother and more impactful.
You said a word that I wanted to talk about, because I think that's the next piece of it. Once you align for yourself, you have that looking in the mirror moment for who you are, what your values are, and what your brand should be, is audience. And there's an audience you already have of the folks that know you, your colleagues, peers, but then there's the other audience of like the people that don't know me that should, and I'm trying to capture more attention with
Mm.
my content, with my branding out there of folks that should know me. So I'd love to just start with that and get your reaction to thinking about like how should people think about as it relates to branding an audience as they're
Yes.
going through this process as a leader.
Yeah, so the first part, right, the people that know me, I would say, how? How do they know you? And are you sure that
Yep.
they know the story about you that you want told? So many of the times, if we're not proactively managing a brand, if we're not proactively managing the narrative and leading the narrative, people are going to make up a story and it may or may not be the story that we want told. And it's not that people are trying to hold us back or it's just that they're making assumptions based on what they're seeing, and so I always challenge people like, well, how do people know what they know? And are you allowing them to make a lot of assumptions about you, or are you leading that conversation? So I have a story about, an individual that I coached who she's been in the United States for 20 plus years. She's originally was born in Russia, and she has let's say an obvious accent. And so she was concerned and she was feeling that people were making assumptions that she was less qualified, or perhaps, more recently in working in the US market than she was, and some things like that. And I asked her, are you bringing it up in the interviews? If this is a concern, how are you leading the story? And the story is, I'm actually fully bilingual, which she is. Fully bilingual, working very successfully in the United States for 20 plus years, and a recognized, project leader, project manager, highly skilled individual, and, capable of communicating across cultures and across teams. So we really just looked at how could she confidently take charge of the storytelling? Well, I just heard from her, and apparently, like the very next interview she got the job. And so it's really those kinds
That's
of
great.
shifts of thinking about, yes, I have an audience today, but they may not be knowing me the way that I need them to know me. They may not know, they may know a previous version of me. That's the other thing, right? So somebody that I worked with 5 years ago may not know what I am ready for today, or may not be updated in terms of the job I'm looking for today. So how would they know to connect you when that comes into their sphere of reference? So then, again, we kind of come back to that operating system. I've also called it an API.
Mm,
When people know where
definitely.
you're trying to go, most people in your network are excited to help you get there, right? With very few exceptions. They just don't know where you're trying to go, or they're not clear about that. And so when you become much more clear about telling people, this is where I'm going, these are the kinds of people I want to be connected to, this is what I want my next opportunity to look like, those people get placed very quickly. I bet you see this in your work as well. So you talked about the second piece, which is how do I use the network I have to get connected to the next set of people I need to be connected to. So as a recruiter, I would bet you see this. People who are very good at communicating with their current network, those people connect them to the next set of people that they need to talk to.
Well, it's so relevant, and not shocked that you brought up an interviewing process because it is how you are selling your story to
Yes.
get an opportunity for yourself. And I think a lot of times where people stumble is they also don't shape the narrative where the person that they're interviewing with becomes like an advocate for them because they
Right.
see that story. There's an alignment for them, and they see this person can bring value and solve some of the problems that we are having here because we
Right.
all have problems. And I do think it's a lot of times a breakdown in storytelling and value proposition alignment with opportunity. So not it's just funny you brought up an interviewing example with one of your coaching clients. That's great.
I think that's right. One of the breakdown that you were talking about, and there's this layer of storytelling that's missing. You've hit it on the head. So a lot of people bring to an interview, I've got this whole set of like facts and figures about my skill sets, my job history, my capabilities, and they speak at this level. And so what's happening is then you make that recruiter or that hiring manager do the thinking. You're leaving the thinking, right? The translation up to them about whether or not that means that you can solve, the problems and challenges that they need solved. Or, you're allowing them to make the translation. Is this person going to be the right fit for my team? And so when we go in and we have done the work, instead of looking across our own, capabilities and so forth, coming in, really from a position of I have a point of view. I'm coming in with a point of view about the problems that you are going to be facing with this kind of space in your job. Let me give you an example. So someone who was looking to move into a marketing leadership kind of role, coming in and going into recruiting meetings and interviews with a very strong point of view on this is what is happening in marketing today. This is where organizations need to move to. And I am leading the charge in that space because, and here's some proof from my experiences. That was a really different kind of interview than just coming in and saying, like, these are all my experiences and why I'm great. You feel that difference in the interview? Two things happened. In one interview, the recruiter said, gosh, that's amazing. And yet that's not the job we have today. I don't think you would be happy here.
Yep.
And he said, you know what? I think you're
Mhm.
right. The next one was, you are the leader we need right now. And we are excited about this and excited to have you bring that to the table and bring that to the role.
It's like flipping the script, which
Exactly.
I think people a lot of times they think they've got a good script and it's just they practice saying it a lot. And I see this with some folks I think that maybe are having a tougher time landing a role that might be, out in the market. Because this is how this is their storytelling of their own branding. Some people don't even have a script. And I would ask you, what would be what would be a simple scripting exercise to go through to start to kind of flip how they are thinking about talking about themselves so that they maybe show up more authentically so that they can connect more authentically with people.
I love that. I think number one, most people, we've all been oriented towards the resume for a million years, right? A lot of people spend a lot of time on the resume.
Absolutely.
And then they start to think in terms of resume. And it's like a list of jobs I've had and a list of accomplishments and facts and figures. And so I think, sitting down and even just doing here's what I like the best. First of all, I like you to just get away from doing this in your head by yourself. So enlist a friend or a mentor or something like that, and just have a couple of sessions where you speak about yourself and you practice speaking about yourself and you record it and transcribe it. And you can start to see where you're falling into sort of patterns of like, when you listen to it back, you're going to see, oh, how did that make the other person feel? Did they understand what was unique about what I was bringing to the table? Or did I kind of fall in this trap of just like repeating my resume? Because I think that's what happens. We're very comfortable with the facts and figures on a resume, and we sort of start repeating our resume. Then I like to do this little exercise, which is look at your experiences and thinking about the role that you want. Imagine that you got invited to a party where, or like a happy hour kind of, event where interestingly, 4 or 5 people are hiring for your dream job are going to be there. So it's not a formal interview kind of situation. How would you, in a very conversation, very friendly way, introduce yourself so that they see that you're a leader in the space? How would you make that emotional connection? And I call this having your party stories. So just like I did earlier in this
Mm.
podcast where I told you my story about my multi-million dollar deal, that's an
Yes.
example of a party story where I demonstrated, I showed you how I think about brand, like in real time. So think about taking some of the best work you've ever done. How would you tell it in a fun and engaging story? And then go practice that with a couple of people who already like you so that you're not so nervous, and start building that muscle as opposed to like, I'm very nervous and I'm kind of just trying to spit out my resume.
Yeah, that it's you are not your resume, right? It's a
Right.
piece of paper that gets you the conversation. And instead of being present in the moment and knowing who they are and being able to communicate that, it's like, here's my script that talks about my resume, right?
Right.
So
And
we have to
I
go
just,
deeper.
yeah. And here's the really shocking thing. So I just went and looked at this again because I wondered if it was, if it had changed or if it was really still the same. This is something that I think has been consistent. And even now, I actually think it's more important now that people are worried about AI, right? And worried about, like, so as a recruiter, I'm worried about, well, good gosh, did they get a machine to write this resume? Am I actually meeting a real human? What am
Right?
I really
Yep.
getting on the other side of this conversation? So historically, and you can go search the internet, that there's Harvard has done some studies, MIT's done some studies. There's been numerous studies throughout the last decade around nonverbal communication and the assumptions people make about us versus verbal communication. And one of the shocking pieces of data is that people will decide, they won't necessarily decide to hire you in the first 30 seconds, but they'll definitely decide if they're not going to hire you in the first 30 seconds. Like literally
Mm,
before you have
yeah.
opened your mouth, people will decide, have already started making the decision. Do I like this person? Do I feel like there's somebody who I would want to work with or sit next to every day? Do I trust them? Do I believe that they have, the confidence and the skills that I need to get me through this next, phase of the work that we need to do together as a team? That's not going to come out in like regurgitating your resume or sort of being on the backhand of the questions. Showing up, ready to talk about like, here's what I think the problems are. Here's how I think about solving those problems. Here's how I want to help. It's a really different place to be from a confidence perspective, and it does read. And I think that, again, people make those gut-based decisions, then they go back through your resume after the conversation to see if they can justify it.
It's yeah, it's a really interesting problem, especially with AI. I just saw this thing that they sort of separate, not related to interviewing, but the Pope just put out messaging that they don't want priests using AI to create homilies. Not to make it a religious thing, but it's just, well, would you identify more and think like, this is filling up my spiritual tank with an AI generated sermon or homily, and it just feels like we need to that's a separate problem that's related to this idea of, I'm going to use AI to make my resume, and that's going to help me then create a script of talking about myself. I'm going to project to my future employer, right? Like
Right.
an audience issue with this communication. Um, so how would you, because I know you're passionate about AI too. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
people are thinking, you know what, I'm going to leverage this to help it give me the script, give me help me form that identity.
Uh-huh.
We've talked a lot about in our conversations pre-pod and about AI, and I know we're both very interested in using the tool as a resource. But what's your guidance
What's the
on
take?
not falling into
Yes.
this trap of like, don't use AI to that, like, don't have it create your resume
No.
and tell your story, right? Like, hey, don't have it create these things that aren't you. Like, would you read a book that's 100% written by AI? Would you spend money on that?
Well, and it's right there's so first of all, I've been in love with technology my whole career, right? I've brought, numerous brand new technologies to market. And and I use AI for myself and with my clients, but I use it in the right way. So I think the thing to come back to is that brand works fundamentally around differentiation. So does trust. Trust works around differentiation. Trust works around where's the humanity in this person that I'm engaged with? And how can I know them? How can I know them? What can I know about them? How can I know them? And is that helping me feel like this is a person that I want to be connected with and that I want to do good work with? And so if we start with AI, a lot of people, I think, just, recap of like a large language model. The whole idea is that that AI is basically built on all of this content that other people have generated. And it is only as smart as synthesizing that thing that already exists. That's what it does. And it does it very well. So, what I would say is two things. Most people, where they get stuck is they sit down and they're like, blank piece of paper, feeling stuck. I'm all in my head. I don't even know how to start. And so the temptation to start with AI is very high because it's like, that's a hard place to be. You're stuck and I'm just trying to get started. I'm trying to figure this out. What I would suggest instead is to start with a microphone. And, if you're comfortable, just start with that mic by yourself. But if you can get other people to just meet with you and record it like we're doing right now, and then start going through like, what do I stand for? What is it I'm up to in the world? What do I think are the biggest challenges in my industry right now? What am I talking about multiple times a week that I'm passionate about right now? Really just talk it out, talk it out, talk it out, talk it out. Tell the story. Just talk out the story of 2 or 3 of the biggest projects you ever landed, why they were successful, what you think your superpowers were in that project. I want to hear your voice and I want to hear the words that you choose. One of the most important things about brand differentiation is language. When I see that resume, when I see that about me on LinkedIn, do I feel like I just met that person, that human being? And would I hear that same kind of voice and tone and language if I met them in person? Or did I meet somebody else? Did I meet an AI generated character? And then when I get on the phone, am I having this feeling of disconnect like, oh, that's not what I thought that person would sound like, or that's not who I thought I was meeting today in the interview? Now, can AI help edit? Can help AI help you sort of refine and edit after you get that body of work that's actually yours. I think, Andrew, one of the most powerful things we can do as brand is start to collect content that came out of our mouth. And then if we are going to ask for AI to reason over content, instead of pointing it at the internet large language model, point it at only our content and ask AI to operate only around content that has been generated by us. Does that make sense as a significant
And
difference
I think
in
it's
approach?
people are so busy, and the
Yes.
bandwidth of like, I always am doing something. I think the average employee has at any given time 40 hours of work that's unfinished. So we're always, for folks that are in a role, I
Probably.
mean, we talked about this earlier, where this manifests as a big problem. People don't have time to spend it on branding and this
Yes.
practice. We want to call it a practice in general, a branding practice, and thinking about it that way. Where I want to go and eventually ask you about is your thoughts around building a brand book, which I know we've talked about and I've had you speak about with some audiences that we're involved with my HR leadership pivot group. But one of the things that I think people struggle with is the time, and not only the time, but also like the silence. As an artist, I'm a big fan of the War of Art, Stephen Pressfield's book. It talks about really finding that voice. If you're a writer, the book was inspired out of him as a writer, having writer's block. So he wrote a book about this idea of writer's block, and it became this really amazing work in finding that voice. And I love this idea of the muse. And I've identified this as a good singer songwriter, as a musician. This is a passion of mine. And if you don't go to the chair where you write the music and sit down and like, I'm just gonna play my guitar and have the time
Right.
to do that, like you're never gonna write a song.
Yes.
Like when are you going to work on your brand and your brand practice if you don't have time for it? I think the temptation is to have other people think for you.
I think what you're getting at too is a simple
Yeah,
setup, right?
100%.
Yes.
It's the
And
setting. It's
perfectionism,
like
I think I heard a little bit of like it's a practice. It's like there's a little bit of daily practice, right? You don't go down. So if you as a musician thought every time I sit down, I'm going to write a song, I'm going to write and be ready to publish a brand new song each time I sit down. I mean, it's not attainable. Right? So the
right. You're
standard,
gonna
right?
write a
We
lot
start
of
thinking
crappy
about,
music.
I've got to have a brand book. I'm going to take a Saturday off, and I'm at the end of one Saturday, I'm going to have a brand book, and then you get like this paralysis because it's like, it just feels big, right? It feels huge. I just like to start in small snippets. Just start practicing your storytelling, start practicing your voice. One of the things I love, for like $25 or $30, you can buy this, one of these ring lights that just goes on your desk, and it has a mount for your phone in the center of it. And you can just hit record and start capturing 1-2 minute videos of yourself. And at the beginning, it might feel awkward and you might feel like, God, I'd never post that. That's terrible. But
Post
the
it anyway.
beautiful thing is you are okay, so I'll give you the first 2 weeks of not posting, right? Just getting comfortable. But on week 3, I do want you to post, right? Take 5 takes, but pick the best one and post it. Yes, because that is a muscle. But even before you post, that collection of videos of you speaking can be transcribed. Now you have something real and authentic to start generating your content from. Right? You can start developing a position and a point of view, which is you're now one step ahead of everyone else. I mean, literally 99% of people that you're going to be competing with or, judged against in a marketplace if you're looking for a job or, trying to land a role, they're not doing it. They're not doing it that way. They're not doing it in a way that would make me feel like you have something unique and special to offer. They're coming, they're showing up at interviews, and they're using the same buzzwords that everybody else is using. I was recently consulting with a client who is hiring. They've had a job open for, I want to say, at least 3 months, and they're not hiring because what they're getting is cookie cutter applicants, and everything that's coming through in terms of resume just sounds like everybody else. And I think it's so interesting because on the other side of that spectrum, I hear people saying it's such a difficult market and there's not enough jobs out there. And here's that connectivity or that API thing again. I think there are jobs. I think people who are showing up in a differentiated way, who have an impactful story that is meaningful and that is specific to them, are getting hired. I hear it every day. Every week I get people coming back to me, Eve, I got the job. I got hired. I made that change and I got hired. And so if I could just encourage people, just make a start. Make a start. Small changes have seismic differences, right? A small change in how a woman was narrating about her her experience and her bilingual, capabilities or bilingual bicultural leadership made the difference between, a long period of not getting the callbacks to the very next time getting the next job.
How do we get started with this? How much time do we need to take to put together an action plan to start to put this into practice?
I love that question. And it kind of just really depends on what we want to make of it, right? So I definitely work with clients who are leaders who have they've either taken a new leadership position or they're ready for that next move, and they're looking at, all kind of their presence as a whole, and they're thinking, gosh, I really need to get after this. I need to invest some time. I need to think through what is my brand, and I really want to go overhaul my LinkedIn site and really kind of make that effort because they're ready to present themselves in a new way. That's a program that takes 3-4 sessions with an expert and have the work done in, I like to say it takes somewhere between 6 and 10 hours of actual back and forth and really crafting that brand narrative for a leader. That's a great way to go. If you're thinking, gosh, I'm not sure, I just want to sort of get a little bit better presenting myself. I know my online presence is an issue, or maybe the way I'm speaking about my accomplishments, I could use a little bit more polish. I would take an approach of test and learn, or practice and learn. And then I would say, look, if you're doing 0 today, start with 3 half-hour sessions a week. Treat it like going to the gym, and have very specific milestones or goals for yourself. This week, I'm going to have a goal of improving my photography on my LinkedIn. And then just go do that. This week, I'm going to have a goal of rewriting my About Me so that it sounds more human. And I'm going to sit down and I'm going to talk about myself for 15 minutes. I'm going to do some recording, and I'm going to get that done, and I'm going to push that out. I'm going to ask a few friends what they think. So test and learn, and don't be afraid. And what I love about this approach for a lot of people is because you build confidence as you go. And every little bit of confidence has the impact that makes you want to do a little bit more. It's sort of just like exercise in that regard. You start going to the gym, you feel a little bit more energy, you start to feel those muscles a little bit different, and you're like, ooh, I like this. I want to do more.
I think that's fantastic advice. Start small. Don't overthink. Perfection is the enemy of progress, right? And so, and allow yourself the time. One thing that I would say, it's like, go sit in the chair. Yep, sit in the chair.
I say that all the time
because
with clients.
You got to make the time for this, and you could have fun with it. Have a couple of different things you want to say. Get it all done at once. You could wear a couple different, right? Like if this was in a studio, right? In a professional setting in Hollywood or something, they might have a couple outfit changes,
Yes.
right? Like you could get all your content in, have a couple different takes, couple different looks. And you could schedule posts out. Like if you were talking about scheduling LinkedIn posts, you can schedule a LinkedIn post. So you're not like, I'm going to post, I'm going to do all this work to create the content. And then maybe I'm going to farm it out and drop them on certain days, and I'll have a couple different looks, but you did it all in one session. I mean, no one will be the wiser. And so I think a lot of people just overthink, and I love your advice
right.
by just
You
kind of
can.
starting small and
You
that
can.
like mind shift change. It's really great stuff, Eve. So this has been fantastic for the audience, for folks that want to follow up with you. I know you have some great offerings and coursework. Your book that I had mentioned earlier. How best can people follow the work that you're doing and stay connected to you?
So first and foremost, look me up on LinkedIn. Follow me on LinkedIn. I'm constantly sharing the work that I do with, my clients. So, if you just want to start learning more about brand, I put out a newsletter a couple times a month. I'm constantly sharing some of the short videos and secret sauce about what to do. I host some workshops that people can attend that just sort of level up specific things like either video presence or, how to get your photography redone the right way, all kinds of tips and tricks like that. So definitely look for me, follow me on LinkedIn at Eve Enslow. And then, if you're interested in going deeper, leaderbrandyourself.com. And what I always like to say to people is, do you have a brand question or problem that I can solve for you in 20 minutes? Let's just get on the phone and have a conversation, because I would love to do that for you.
I find your guidance and advice incredibly valuable as I think about my own brand and thinking about how do I show up in the marketplace. But your expertise is really appreciated, and thank you so much for joining me here on Talent Take 5. Folks, if you like this video podcast episode, please subscribe. You can find it on YouTube or Spotify, and I post, of course, the episodes to LinkedIn as well. So please follow Eve, and thank you so much again for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time on Talent Take 5.
I'm the one you should be giving your attention to, but instead you're just giving me the runaround.